Greetings! It's I, 10th Snare of Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire. And welcome. I did reverse and didn't hit the mute button to cough there, so sorry. But welcome, yes, everybody. We're diving back into Golarion and Pathfinder lore. And if, of course, you're joining me live over on Twitch, hey, Twitch, I love having you here. And if you're joining me later on YouTube, I also love you joining us, YouTube. YouTube, you're great guys. You know, ringing the bell, liking the video, subscribing, all that stuff is really great. So, this is an interesting one because I'm going to both ask a question about playing something and also experiencing something. What is your experience with Hryngar? Or, as they used to be called, Hryngar. Because with the changes and the walking away from old D&D lore and connections to what had been D&D stuff, Hryngar is the new term for the Grey Dwarfs of the Darklands. I was almost going to call it Underdark, but it's Darklands. So we have had this major shift already, and I'm going to talk about all it because we have information from a book that came out last year, and that helps a lot. So let's talk about those books, though, because I like mentioning books that you can check out yourself when we're diving into lore like this. That, you know, if you want to do further research or, you know, read up on what I've been talking about, hey, you can. Into the Darklands was one of the original chronicles. It talked about a lot about the Darklands, and of course the Inner Sea World Guide also went over information. And these are the two places, if you're looking into Pathfinder 1st Edition, to look about Hryngar. Again, still Dwargar at this point in time. But when we kind of come to 2nd Edition, we have two sources here which are really good. And the first time is the High Helm book. High Helm will be the best source of information for the Hryngar, especially most up to date. But you can also look to the 2nd Edition Adventure Path from the Agents of Edgewood Path, 60 feet under. So these two books here will give you a great idea of how Hryngar work in Pathfinder now, leading up to, of course, the Monster Core and a lot of these updates and stuff that are occurring in the system, as they have been for the updates, and the walking away from, you know, D&D OGL stuff. So then we asked the question, who are the Hryngar? That's a good place to start. Grey Dwarfs, Deep Dwarfs, of course Dwargar. They are dwarfs. They inhabit underground cities in Narvoth. Many will reveal Droskar, the dwarven god of toil, but not all of them do. It is not a necessity to venerate Droskar. And Droskar is the neutral, evil dwarven deity as part of the pantheons. It is the technical patron of the Hryngar. Hryngar. I get it right perfectly one of these days. So, if you look at a Hryngar, they're similar in appearance to a dwarf. The main thing that's different is their ashen gray skin. And yes, there are those that are bald, but some of them do have hair. It's not a necessity to be bald or have hair. That is a thing that has evolved. Like in 1st Edition, they were all bald. But, you know, nowadays, some of them do have hair. Just keep that in mind there. I'm showing you the bald guy here. They are creatures of a lightless realm. They have very superior dark vision to their surface-dwelling cousins. See almost twice as far as your average dwarf. They still do have resistance to magic, but are immune to poisons and paralytic attacks. And they have a supernatural origin, which I will talk about when I talk about their history. That leads to them being able to turn invisible and enlarge themselves. So they've gained magical abilities because of this supernatural essence that has changed into them. And we got a Hryngar assassin there. So, where do they come from? Well, the quest for the sky. That's the result of this. The quest for the sky was occurring. Most dwarfs left these ancestral homes deep in Narvoth in the Darklands during this time in the Age of Darkness. But they didn't all leave, and that's something that isn't talked about a lot by the dwarfs. It's like their entire culture up and left. No. Many refused to leave these ancient cities behind. But the thing is, it was very few of them refused in comparison to the number that left. The vast majority of dwarfs began the quest for the sky. Those that were left behind had very little numbers in order to hold on to these ancient cities and settlements. And harassment and attacks from other species within the Darklands basically continued for ages. And the Hryngar had to abandon city after city. And they faced basically genocide. And it's then that Droskar was brought in. Because Droskar is an evil dwarven god, and basically, yes, it's his fault they became the Hryngar. He offered them survival. He wanted unquestioning devotion. And yes, things have changed since then, the devotion, the connection is weakened to the dark god, but still many do worship and connect to him. And these dwarfs, without any other real option, accepted and became Hryngar's, which in Dwarven means the Grey-Faced. Droskar gifted them with magic and helped them learn to train giant spiders and beetles as mounts and guards. And these two major things, mastering some magic and learning to basically train vermin as, or these like insects, dangerous giant ones, as pack animals, guards and mounts, they came back from extinction and have reclaimed many of their lost cities. They had a major comeback because of this. So, they are now one of the most widespread and prolific species, ancestries you can find in Narvoth. I'll talk about these major cities, but beneath Avastian, they inhabit the cities of Felstock, Hagegraf, and Dipkammer. Those are the major cities they have. They control the longest and widest tunnel systems in Narvok, known as the Long Walk, which is heavily patrolled and runs between Hagengraf and Felstock. And because they freely gave themselves to the Dark Smith, it's not surprising that their society is a very violent one and filled with endless work. So, yes. And another thing that exists is they are one of the greatest slaving species within the Darklands. So, it's just an unfortunate thing that the influence of that dark god, which is weakening, still has driven them down a very dark path. Doesn't mean you couldn't find very... Hryngar society isn't monolithic. Just keep that in mind. Their leadership is probably pretty terrible. Tends towards lawful evil. But the average individual may be different. And it will depend on who you meet when you're out there. But just know, they are not friendly to surface dwellers, and you might find one that would just want to kill you, enslave you, or maybe they'll be willing to talk. But that one's a really low percentage chance. And wonder why you're there. And especially if you're entering territory controlled by them, rather than just running out to them somewhere in the wilds of the Darklands. It's a interesting thing about all of it. So, let's talk about those settlements and cities a little bit, because honestly speaking, it's their civilization. So, a lot of old ancient dwarven cities have been recaptured, as I mentioned, but they've also rebuilt ancient dwarven strongholds. They've had a lot more architectural modifications. They look to more functional architecture. Very brutalist lines. Their cities are free of extreme poverty and dissatisfaction or signs of dissatisfaction or rebellion. It seems impressive, but it's simple that it's because of the influence of what Droskar has done to them, it still remains in their mindsets to a degree. They don't know the meaning of rest, and they're always looking to perfect everything around them. Structures, weapons, magic. And so the only people that work harder than them are the people that they've basically enslaved. Now, there are a number of Hryngar cultists that live beneath the inhospitable portions of the falling mountains in Vudra, where they labor beneath the earth to free the mechanical god Tuagur and his children. I mean, maybe. I don't know if dwarves have concrete. They probably too. Because the question is, what is the old dwarven architecture that exists? But yes, Tuangir, the mechanical god, there's some cultists working for him that... See, they're Hryngar that have basically become cultists. So, Fellstrock. It's a large town, nearly 4,000, and it is a stronghold connected via tunnels to Hrygir in the Hold of Belkazin, the Orc capital. It is one of the largest settlements of Hryngar nowadays. Again, it's only a small fraction the size of Hagengraft. It was retaken very recently by the Hryngar. Okay. I understand. So I'm guessing probably a lot of concrete, because it does describe it as brutalist. Good to know. Thank you. Almost brutalist lines. So it probably looks very concrete, even though it might not be made of very concrete. But very utilitarian, probably, is the best way to describe it. In this location, they continue to fight with Grimlocks, Mongrel Men, other dangerous denizens of the Darklands. It was a dwarven settlement at one point in time that was abandoned in the quest for the sky. There are the threat of these Narvothians basically connecting to the surface and battling with the orcs, or having connections with them in some way. There's a lot of questions about it. The members of Fellstrock do worry, because as much as the Hryngar are not the dwarfs that they were before they become the Hryngar, they still kind of hate orcs. It turns out your ancestral enemies are still your ancestral enemies, and they're even more vengeful, and so are and there's a lot of the threat of the surface exists in this place here, definitely. And they are linked to Hagengraft by the Long Walk here at Fellstrock. We'll talk about Hagengraft last. Let's talk about Diekammer. Which I can... and Fellstrock is, of course... I don't have anything... It's a conventional... it's a military government there. Diekammer has a council that rules over it, the Seven Patriarchs. It's a secret Hryngar fortress in the Darkland regions of Narvoth. It's somewhere beneath the Taldor's World Edge mountains, fortified by warriors and traps. And the Seven Patriarchs are legendary rulers of the Hrungars. They sometimes travel, other leaders sometimes travel here to consult the Patriarchs, and their rulings are considered divine law because they're believed to directly communicate with Droskar. Again, Droskar still is a major point in here. Their society is still very corrupt and dark, and, their rulership is very lawful evil. It doesn't mean individuals are. It's one of those things that, you have to keep that in mind. Doesn't mean your average one is you're going to meet. Probably not going to be kind of leaning towards that one, but the Seven Patriarchs are these kind of beings that are said to be immortal because they are the first worshippers, the first Hrungars to worship Droskar. So that's another thing. But it is of note, in 4708, 5 of the 7 patriarchs had died under mysterious circumstances. The remaining 2 were kept secret, looking for those reasons for those deaths. We don't know what caused this. And again, we are surprisingly close to now, if you keep in mind that for the Age of Lost Omens, that we are in, 4724 in Golarion. And this is 4708, 16 years ago. Did the last 2 survive? Did they find out what was killing them? Again, we don't know. But it is a thing that would be a destabilizing force, perhaps in the worship of Droskar. So it's again, we know that Droskar is not as major a deity right now, but it's not been this major ripple yet. Basically, Deep Calmer is keeping secret that these ones died. The 5 died. It's going to have major implications if things are discovered. And, this is a major implication for the way that, honestly, Hryngar society works. Again, opening for various adventures that we haven't had yet that could be written that maybe, Paizo might explore. Haven't yet. But when we see these openings for exploration and information, it's very interesting. So let's talk Hagegraf. We have information. We've got some things from Into the Darklands, and of course, High Helm has information on it. It's a metropolis. It was a little over 32,000, nearly 33,000 in about 4708, and we know in 4723 it surged to about a little more than 34,000. Mostly Hryngar, with a number of other species there. It's a monarchy. We know their king. I'm going to try to butcher I'm not going to try to butcher these names right now. Karinde Orgu Kagan. Who's, oh god, 18th level character. Yeah, fucking, don't mess with that guy. The most powerful king, and he's the most powerful king of the Hryngar. Probably only secondary to that council, but doesn't maybe exist anymore. So Hagegraf controls the Long Walk, and their control of it is the bastion of basically Hryngar civilization in a way. They are the backbone of their control over the large portions of the underground here in the homelands. And it's this control in the Darklands that has spread. And granted, yes, they are widespread beyond this, but these 3 major places are their most critical places in general. Hagegraf is an immense cavern. It resembles a massive arena enclosed by a circle of fortresses. There's large stalactites that hang down from the ceiling, linked by a network of bridges, where the nobility lives. It's home to a massive clock known as Arkazoth Horologe. It is an engineering marvel in the Darklands and a tourist attraction. So the thing about this here is Hagegraf doesn't say no to non-dwarven visitors. You are welcome to the city if you pay the entrant tax of 10 gold pieces per wagon and a 20 gold piece exit tax per person. And if not, you end up in the dungeons, or worse. Well, worse. Caravans of creatures often leave on a regular basis for markets and other places, because, hey, these slavers move in and out of here. So, yeah. Again, as long as you pay the gold, you're very welcome there, and obey their laws. They are lawful evil. They're not going to take you for not going to do anything bad for any specific reason other than if you break any of their rules or don't pay the taxes. Turns out, and you're not a dwarf. Not in good terms with their surface dwelling cousins. Turns out, that's a thing. But, yeah. I think that will leave us today for the Hryngar. And again, I do think there could be more stories to explain, and I think they're... It's not that their civilization isn't a cusp. I think that's the thing about this age of Lost Omens. It's an evolution for the planet of Golarion. It's not necessarily that the evils of the world are going away. It's that some of the more darker powers and things that have been in existence are losing grip in a lot of ways. But in similar ways, it's like the planet is turning more neutral, honestly. Which is probably fine. There will be good and bad in the world, but there's no... It's becoming more gray. Something that has sort of existed here and there, but like essences of revolution, of change, similar to what a lot happened in our Renaissance, are beginning now in Golarion, and even in the Hryngar. Why is that changing? Well, Droskar has loosened its grip on them. It's an interesting thing to say that not all do worship and revere Droskar anymore. The fact that there are cultists, the fact that this grip has loosened, and that his apparent immortal servants, 5 are dead. 5 died out of 7 of his speakers, of his living embodiments in the Hryngar society. That's a big thing. That's a flag that says something's going on. And yes, it's not going to be the best society to visit if you can go there. But honestly speaking, if you had a way to travel to someplace like Hryngar, you could. You could find yourself a visit there, you could take care of whatever business you need, and leave relatively safely. Granted, the Darklands are a dangerous place, and once you're outside the purview of things, might not be protected. And certainly if you're using something like the Long Walk, you're under the eyes of the Hryngar, and how they treat you will depend on why you're there. And don't be a dwarf while you're going down there, because honestly speaking, they're not always good. And also, Hryngar is under the 5 Kings Mountains. Remember that. I didn't mention that, but I have to note that one there. That's a big thing about where they're located. The 5 Kings Mountains. The heart of their surface cousins society. And they're close to the heart of their rival society. Would the Hryngar and surface dwarfs be able to get along? Maybe on an individual level, but on a societal level, there's a lot to say. Certainly there's probably surface dwarfs that do worship Droskar. That's not outside. Droskar is part of the Dwarven Pantheon. They might be able to get along with them. But that's not the whole of Dwarven society. Droskar is an evil Dwarven deity as part of the Dwarven Pantheon. There's a lot to say and unpack in the entire thing that makes it complex. But for now, I will leave this and say, hey, hope you enjoyed learning about them. They are complex people that are more than just what... You can't stereotype them the way that you'd think. And I think that's an important part about all the intelligence ancestries, whether they are ones that are more savage. They are, in fact, more complex than you'd think. And given the right circumstances, will move towards more peaceful coexistence with what is defined as civilization on Golarion. The Hryngar have a civilization. Is it one that gets along the surface? Not really, but it doesn't mean it couldn't. Things just need to change sometimes. If you want to see more tabletop stuff I do talk about this 3 days a week, on either Tuesdays and Thursdays in early afternoons, and around usually Saturdays on early mornings. That might change for scheduling. On Wednesdays, I have a Pathfinder live play. If you want to see us play some Pathfinder First Edition, Crimson Queen, Wednesdays, 9 p.m. EST. check that out. And of course, Discussing Tabletop at 6 p.m. EST on Saturdays, where I talk about tabletop news of the week and deeper discussions on tabletop topics. I do other live streaming on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, usually kind of midday, just some gaming, hanging out, chatting, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm always up for chatting a little tabletop if you want to come join me. I have Discord, Twitter, link down below, and I think that's all the shout-outs I need to give. So there's social media, general schedule, what you might want to check out. I have a lot of other Pathfinder videos I've done, so if you're joining me live, go check those out on YouTube. And if you're over on YouTube, hey, you might want to join me live, or go see some of those other Pathfinder videos where I have plenty of others talking about plenty of other different things. But until the next time we talk Pathfinder, Golarion, another tabletop system, or anything of the such, I bid all of you people out there a deep and wonderful farewell.